a number of major causes of acquired brain injury in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, regardless of whether people live in urban, rural or remote. Let's have a look at a number of those acquired brain injuries. If we look at head trauma from violence, particularly domestic violence, what we are seeing as a causation factor for our women who sustain an acquired brain injury as a result of domestic violence. And unfortunately, this is often due to failed strangulation. So what this means is that the brain doesn't receive enough oxygen, and that is known as a hypoxic brain injury. Similarly, we're starting to see some trends for our young women where they have been unable to complete an act of suicide, and as a result of that is a hypoxic brain injury. We're seeing a new generation of young people being born as a result of fecal alcohol syndrome in babies, and that's usually because their mum has drank during pregnancy. I think we need to do a whole lot of work around understanding the impact of drinking during pregnancy. One of the other major causes of brain injury in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities is as a result of sniffing volatile substances such as petrol, glue and solvents. These are particularly nasty because what these elements actually do is affect the frontal lobes of the brain. And as we know, the frontal lobes are responsible for a certain number of functions, such as managing our social interactions, understanding inhibition and disinhibition. Another major cause of brain injury in communities, whether they be rural, urban or remote, is alcohol-related brain injury. If you have a look at some of the websites, in particular drinkwise.org.au, it talks about the impact of alcohol and on a growing brain and also an older brain. There's a medical term for people who sustain an alcohol-related brain injury, and this is known as Korsakoff syndrome. It affects our memory, it affects our executive functioning, such as our ability to make judgments and decisions. One of the greatest challenges that we have found is when communicating with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities, is that for many communities the word disability is not known. So I guess that makes it a bit hard in terms of how do you deliver a service if disability is unknown. And I think if you actually unpack that, one of the reasons for that is that often for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, disability has become normalised. So there's almost an expectation, whether it be from within that community or from the community from outside, our non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander partners, is that to be Aboriginal, to be a Torres Strait Islander, means that you have a disability. So one of the things that we're doing at Synapse, and in conjunction with our partners, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, is to actually look at establishing and showing that disability is not a normal part of life. The impact of alcohol and substance abuse is one of the main causes of challenging behaviour, domestic violence and family breakdowns that are currently being experienced in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. If we look at some of the research by the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner, Commissioner Mick Gooder, he certainly identifies the impact of alcohol and substance abuse in breaking down the traditional structures within our communities. There's a wonderful way in which Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities are playing a greater role in addressing the impact of alcohol and substance abuse in their own communities. And this particularly is around the wisdom and the knowledge of our elders and also our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders. If you have a look at some of the communities, there's some amazing work that our women, particularly our older women, our elders are actually doing, and our aunties. What we're seeing is communities who are working at ways to own the problems of alcohol and substance abuse and have made a decision that there are better solutions to the impact of alcohol and substance abuse within their own communities. The Australian Council of Governments a couple of years ago developed some strategies in looking at closing the gap, particularly around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health-related outcomes. I think it's important to recognise that there's going to be a significant number of ways in which we can close the gap on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. I think what's most important is understanding the interrelationship between all of these elements. So let's say, for example, if you don't have a job, let's say you don't have housing, let's say that you don't have education, those three elements will affect your health outcomes. So it's difficult to actually separate them. So in order to close the gap, one of the things that we must do is look at addressing some of those underlying issues: health outcomes, housing, education and unemployment. Only then will we start to see some changes in closing the gap around mortality and morbidity for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. I've recently been asked what my interest is in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs, and I guess that's quite an interesting question. For a start, I'm a very, very proud Waka Waka woman, and I guess because I am an Aboriginal person, I feel like I have a responsibility to participate and to make sure that there's greater understanding about the history of our people and the sufferings. And I think my particular interest lies in working in the health outcomes associated with Close the Gap. But I guess more particularly is the interface between health, welfare, disability, education, housing and unemployment. All of those areas need to be worked on if we're going to see true changes in the welfare of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.